Hi, so here is a quick tutorial on how to use our African Market Potential Index Toolbook. We built this as a tool that our clients can use to quickly, prioritize the countries they want to focus on as they expand their organization across Africa. It has most of the variables that we use, we pull them in from credible sources, and it's just a quick reference point that you can use to generate reports and help you expand and choose the countries that you should be focusing on. So I would go through each of the tabs just to kind of orient you and then show you how to use the toolbook. All right, so here is the instructions tab. If you're watching this video now, you probably do not need to read this, or yes, you don't need to read this unless you just want to use it as a reference point. Here is a monitor tab. This is where you'll be spending most of your time changing some of these variables, monitoring, and then getting your results. And here the filter tab is where each time you change a variable, you're going to have to come here and refresh the rankings before you go back and look at your results. And finally, the database. This is where all the raw data is. Try refrain from changing anything here. It has all the data from about 50 of the 54 African countries, and here we have about close to 55 data points from different sources: the World Bank, IMF, the Fraser Economic Institute, and most of the sources are referenced, so you can use some of these points, but try your best not to change anything because this is raw data. If you want to make any changes, make sure you make a copy of this spreadsheet so you can always come back to the original. Okay, so let's go back to the monitor page. And this is where you'll be changing most of your variables. What you want to be changing here are the values in orange. You have the short-term goals, market size and resilience, business ease and infrastructural development, and lastly, good governance and human development. And this tab, which we really don't change that much, but is diversification. So once you change these values, you'll be able to monitor each thing. This is the actual weighted average that will be applied across each of these weightings. And if you need to understand a little bit more about what some of these weightings are, make sure you reference the article that we wrote about some of these factors, or how these 7 factors are used to rank across each country. So once you are changing these values, then you want to look at, make sure everything is good in the monitor tabs here. And then each time you change a value, you want to come to your rankings. You want to sort. And then you want to come back here and view your results. So those are the major steps. So let's take an example. So the first thing you want to do is, figure out whether you want to focus on short and long-term goals. So in this case, you can change the value here from 0.1 to 0.9. If it's 0.5, then it's balanced. And the same thing applies for these other 3 factors. So right now is 0.5 short-term goal, 0.5 long-term. You can notice those numbers right here. If we change that to 0.2, that means we're focusing more on short-term goals as opposed to long-term goals. You can see the value has changed here. Now it's more weighted towards the short-term and less weighted towards long-term. You can change here that to, if you want to focus more on the long term, now it's more focused on long term, and then less on the short term. If you notice, most of these values are changing also. Same thing applies. Let's change this back to a balance. Same thing applies here. If you're more focused on market size, then you want to change this to a lower value. It could be 0.3. And if you notice in here, the market size is more weighted than resilience, which are both part of your short-term goals. And you could change this to 0.7. It flips over more resilience than more of a focus on resilience than the actual market size. You can do the same for business ease. If you're more interested in business ease, 0.2. Here, the business ease is more important than infrastructural development, and I believe you get the idea now. You get the drift. So the last one, let's change all this back to 0.5. Last one is economic diversification. We don't really change this that much. The reason why is a lot of African countries are equally undiverse, but if you feel compelled to change this, this value is tied to the factor here, the short to long term factor. So depending on how big you want that factor to be, just change the value of the denominator. So if it's 10, that means it's not as important. If it's 2, that means it's very important to you. And you see the values changing here. So let's go back to our default of 6. All right. So let's do an example. So now let's say you are interested in figuring out short term, what markets would be more attractive in the short term for you and your business. You change this to 0.2. All right. So if you notice, the values have changed, but even though the values have all changed here, we have to do one more thing. We have to go to the rankings. We have to then filter out the rankings. So these numbers have changed, but we now have to refresh and just click sort Z to A. If you notice, everything has changed. You go back to your monitor page, and here are your results. So right now, it shows if we want to focus on short term, the top 5 countries are Egypt, South Africa, Uganda, Nigeria, Mauritius. Let's focus on the long term. So we went back here and said, okay, we're more interested in the long term. Change it to 0.8. The numbers have changed again. You want to come here, 0.8, 0.2. It looks balanced. We haven't touched any of these values. They all look balanced. Now we have to go back here and refresh. Sort Z to A. I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am, I apologize. Go back to the monitor page, and based on long term, now we have a new ranking. Mauritius is number 1, South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, and Seychelles. So here you have it. You can always just play around. Now let's go back to balanced goals, short and long term goals. Go back to 0.5. We once again sort Z to A, and then we come back here. These are the top rankings. So for instance, if we're like, okay, we are more interested in big market size compared to resilient economy, and resilient is more stable economy. So the preference is for bigger markets, regardless of whether it's resilient or not. So we put that at 0.2. Make sure you come here and check. You see the market size is more important than resilience. We go to the references. We sort Z to A. It gives us a new ranking. And here you have your rankings. Now, For preference or market size, we have Egypt, South Africa, Mauritius, Nigeria, or Morocco. If you are more interested in a resilient economy, a more stable economy over the market size, you come here again. So it's pretty easy. Just keep changing things around depending on what's important to your organization. Now Uganda is number one, South Africa, Mauritius, Kenya, Swaziland. Yeah, and you can just keep playing around with these numbers. Let's do one more example. We're more interested in business ease. Um, Here, boom. What does that give us? South Africa, Mauritius, Egypt, Uganda, Morocco. These are your top countries. Again, these are your bottom countries. Um, and yeah, let's do a last one. We're more interested in the short term and a country that has good infrastructure. 0.7. And let's just say with good governance. 0.2. Make sure you come here. This is balanced, short term. Good infrastructure is more important than business ease and good governance, right? Go to your rankings, refresh. Make sure you always refresh. Monitor. And your top 5 countries: South Africa, then Egypt, Uganda, Mauritius, Nigeria. So keep playing around with this, and you can always find the countries to choose or prioritize, and it's an easy tool that we built, and it's an easy way for you to pretty much choose the countries that you want to focus on in 2019. Obviously, every year the database would change with new numbers, but this is what you can use for 2019. And if you need any information, any assistance, you feel free to contact us. If you have chosen the countries you want to prioritize, you can also just let us know how we can help you build your strategy for each country. Enjoy the toolbook and have fun, play around with it. All right.